Welcome back to the AME Food Safety Show. I love this song by Earth, Wind, and Fire. It's called Fantasy. We do live in a partial fantasy life. This segment I'm particularly serious about, folks. We've had a drought in California. This is a little bit off topic. You might say, Andy, why are you doing this? We need food to grow. We need food to eat. We need water to grow food. Therefore, we need water. California's had a drought for the last few years. And I've often wondered why we're having a drought here. I don't just say, oh, it's not going to rain today. I want to look for analytical reasons, usually related to chemistry. Water is a chemical reaction. The clouds absorb the water. The clouds bring it over, usually from the Pacific, either high Pacific or low, mid or far south. They bring it in through the winds, and they deposit it here in the Central Valley so we can all eat. Here's my concern, and I'm looking at everyone within the viewing of this program, and I'm asking them, yes, the Congress might control certain elements of the water, and they think they're the ultimate authority on the earth. I don't believe that. I believe that there are forces on the earth which are related to congressional or governmental forces or governmental resources that don't have our best interest, that are completely oblivious to our need for water. In fact, there may be even some which can be considered criminal or in violation of our rights as human beings. Let's go through that. And this may be a total fantasy, and you can call me and say, Andy, you're a complete nut. I feel strongly about this. First slide. I'm going to directly address the issue of chemtrails and drought in California. Is there a relationship? And you can say, no, Andy, you're totally nuts and turn this off. Or you can say, okay, let's listen to what he has to say, and let's let him say his theory. It may be on the border of conspiracy, or maybe on the border of fact that's already passed, or maybe an ongoing conspiracy based on politics or whatever the global geoeconomic rationale they may have or reasons. Look on the left of this slide. You see an aircraft. I used to be a pilot. There are basically two kinds of aircraft. One is propeller driven, and the other is a jet aircraft. There's some rocket aircraft, but it's very limited. Having worked at NASA, I'll tell you, very limited applications to rocket because of the very short burn time and high thrust. But as you look and study that picture on the left, what do you see? You see an aircraft, and this particular picture is particularly illustrative of what is the force moving it forward, keeping it in the air. And what are those other nozzles for, and what are they emitting? They're emitting a chemical. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see the world I live in here in Fresno. We're being asked, and some points required, to not use water for certain things. But that sign, I've seen it several times on the freeway. Food grows where water flows. I agree with that 100%. And I'm wondering if there's a relationship between that aircraft and what chemical is sending out and the drought. That's for you to answer, not for me. Is there a relationship? I don't know, but I'm thinking, and I'm thinking out loud in a fantasy-type way. Rain has significantly dropped in the last few years here in Central California. Is that normal? Are we in a long cycle? Andy, we're in a long weather cycle. Okay, that's fine. Let's look at the next slide. The water that we get here in the Central Valley to grow food that almost everybody in the world eats comes from the mountains. Very little water as it comes percolating up from the ground. The wells are stored from water that comes from the mountains. The drought intensity on the far left, you see a graph. It's right here in the Central Valley, probably more toward the West Valley, but it is in the West Valley and the San Joaquin Valley. Exceptional drought. Look at that satellite picture in the middle. That's a normal year in 2013, 2014. We hardly have any snow. And I've listened to the news lately. If you have, there's very little snow in the Sierra Nevadas. I don't know that I totally agree that Congress created the Dust Bowl, but I know they're contributing to it by some litigation up in the Sacramento River. So it's not just the political issues, but there's an actual reduction in snow falling. Why? Next slide. Where does our rain come from? I already mentioned it comes from the Pacific primarily, but as you notice that thermal graph, it's primarily coming from the Philippines. A lot of it comes from the north through Alaska, but it's coming through what's called a front. The clouds absorb the water from the sea. They bring it in. As you look at that chart on the right-hand side, it's very recent. It shows the typical pattern of these fronts, bringing the water and depositing, hopefully, in our mountains. So the storm brings the water from the Pacific Ocean, from the west to the east and the north to the south, in our area. It's a very complicated situation. Scientists and weather personnel have been charting for 100 years, plus or minus, and been putting this data into computer models and making estimates. But I've always challenged weather reporters to give me a 10-day forecast that's 100%. They can't. They're lucky to do 1 or 2 days with reasonable percentage of accuracy. It's very complicated. Next slide. All right. What is a weather modification? This slide actually came up from YouTube. You can look it up. And if you look down at that bottom, I believe that's Yosemite. Why are those aircraft in that formation? And if you look at the contrails, they're relatively consistent, but some have come earlier and later. Some have dispensed out through the environmental forces. But that's a very unusual contrail pattern. Very rarely will you have the FAA switch flight pattern so they're all in a formation like that. In fact, it's illegal for private aircraft to fly in a formation. That formation is particularly unusual. Next slide. What is a chemtrail? And there's a lot of controversy on this, and I'm walking on some thin ice here. But I will say to you, aircraft that have jet engines will produce a contrail, but not that dispersed, not that uniform, because the FAA regulations don't allow aircraft to fly in a pattern like that. They usually fly at different altitudes, at different heights, if you will, from the Earth, and usually in different directions. But you rarely see, look at that planetary view, it's a satellite picture on the bottom. You see those concentric trails? And that's going from California out to the Pacific. I've flown to Hawaii about 25 times in my previous occupation. We never fly that sort of pattern. It's straight out, straight back. Airlines want to conserve their fuel. That aircraft, particularly on the right-hand side, that NOAA picture, do you see how that aircraft is going back and forth in a consistent pattern? That's not commercial aircraft. That's not recreational airspace. Something is going on out there, and you see how wide, in comparison to the state of California, those chemical patterns are, those contrails. There's something going on. Maybe you can help me. Next slide. These particular pictures came from questionable sources, but I have a question. Why are those contrails against and in front of that oncoming weather pattern? Weather modification traditionally has been to release from the clouds into the ground, the environment, water. As you look at that screen on the left, you will see the pattern of the Bay Area, Northern California, and all the way down to Southern California. And it appears to me, and I'd like you to think about it, whether or not there is a cloud seeding pattern. Why would they be doing that? Releasing the water into the Pacific Ocean, the rain, and not allowing it to come into California. I've owned aircraft. It's very expensive to both fuel them, to maintain their maintenance logs, to fly them, the time, preparation, flight preparation, your filing of the logs. That is a very unusual pattern to me, to fly back and forth in front of a weather pattern. That's never done on a commercial airline because you want to get from point A to point B as quickly, as safely as possible. On the right-hand side, you see a satellite picture of the same activity. That those aircraft are going back and forth, and that's not commercial aircraft. There's nothing north of that landmass. I'm concerned with these sites. I'm concerned with this satellite imagery. Maybe it's all fake, Andy. Somebody just did Photoshop on it. That's possible, but it looks pretty authentic to me, and it may be a false image of the world, but that's what I see. Next slide. Why are they spraying? That's the central core question. What's the purpose of releasing these chemicals out into the environment? And as you look at those patterns, they should spur some kind of curiosity, even in the most unaerial trained individual watching this show. What's going on there? That should be your principal answer. You should look for that and use that as an action step to do further research. Next slide. What are my suggestions? Here is my only suggestion, and I believe it from the core of my being. We need to find those pilots. Whether they are U.S. Air Force, whether they're foreign interests, we need to find the pilots. Next, we need to find the maintenance and the mechanical engineers that are working on that aircraft. You cannot fly an aircraft, a helicopter, every hour of flight requires 100 hours of maintenance. Some aircraft you can fly for 2 hours and have 50 hours of maintenance. But those aircraft require maintenance. That chemical came from someplace, having been a chemist. Some company had to produce it. I need everyone to look for those pilots and have them come forward. They're humans. They cannot know the suffering we're having here in the Central Valley. People that can't water their yards. People that are farmers, they can't plant crops because there's no water given to them. Politicians are not a good resolution to this, some congressional hearing. We need the actual pilots, the actual mechanics to come forward. That's my cry, my hue and cry out to my audience today. Call me crazy. I sincerely believe if this is going on, those pilots, those mechanics, those aeronautical engineers know what's going on, and the chemistry company that produced those chemicals, they know what's going on. Thank you very much. Appreciate it today. Look forward to our next segments. And always eat safe food. Thank you very much.